What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. I'm recording this on Wednesday, June 18th. We had Game 5 of the NBA Finals on Monday night in a series that was going into the game tied at 2 games apiece. Been a very entertaining back and forth series, but this game got a little out of hand late, and the Thunder won Game 5, 121-109. So going to just talk through everything about Game 5, do a quick recap, and then talk about both teams and where the series goes from here. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. So starting off with a quick recap of the game, we had the same lineups once again with the OKC Thunder going with the 2 big look with Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren in there. Kason Wallace coming off the bench still. And this was back and forth early. Both teams playing pretty well, making shots. The Pacers found themselves up 12-11 to start the game before OKC went on an 11-0 run to go up 22-12. And over this span, the Pacers were just doing a really bad job kind of on both ends. On the defensive end of the court, they were losing a lot of guys defensively on back cuts and rolls to the basket and in transition. Just a lot of easy lanes off some good passes from the Thunder to get wide open looks at the basket, basically. And they were really sloppy with the ball to start this game offensively. Siakam had 3 live ball turnovers in just a few minutes early on in this game. And it led to the Thunder playing with a ton of pace in this one. They were pushing the ball off of misses and turnovers, getting out and running, and it led to some easy buckets early. But the Pacers did finally start to force a few misses once SGA went to the bench. But then they were allowing some offensive rebounds early in this first quarter. We even got some Tony Bradley minutes as a bit of a counter there. But the Pacers end the quarter with 7 total turnovers, only 40% shooting from the field. And it was yet another game in which the Thunder got off to a quick start in the first quarter and had a lead. They were up 10 points, 32-22 in this one. And that's been a trend in this series. Game 1, the Thunder were up 9. Game 2, they were up 6. Game 3, they were up 8. Game 4 was the only one they did not lead. But even that one, the Pacers had a 9-point lead, and then it was only 1 point at the end of the quarter. So Indiana, the one good first quarter they had, they still couldn't really capitalize on that quarter with any sort of cushion going into the second quarters. And Indiana's only averaged 21.5 points per game in the first, excluding Game 4. So they really have not been able to get much going in that quarter. And they've been playing catch up basically the entire series outside of basically one game. But in the early second quarter, Haliburton left the game with a right leg injury. They showed him back in the locker room. He would eventually return, but obviously looked like a little bit of a compromised version of himself. But the majority of the second quarter was just classic Pacers Thunder, where Thunder built up a bit of a lead, and you thought, okay, maybe they could blow this thing out and create some separation to a point where Indiana won't be able to make this interesting. Or Indiana can, cut into this lead so that it's manageable by half. But it was kind of doing that same thing it's been doing, staying in that little in between, the 8 to 12 point range. And it felt like at any moment, OKC could blow it open or Indiana could make it interesting. But the Thunder did eventually push that lead in the second quarter up to 16 points. And over that span, Haliburton continued to look really compromised. He was scoreless on 0 of 5 shooting with only 2 assists at halftime and sat for, what felt like a disproportionate amount of his normal minute load in this game just because, 1, he was a little banged up, but 2, he wasn't effective when he was out there. And the Pacers did start to clean up some of the turnovers towards the end of this quarter, but they could not buy a bucket in the second. They went 7 of 25 in the second quarter, which is 28% from the field. So Oklahoma City found themselves up 14 points at halftime, but it really felt like it could have been more. The Pacers were not playing well. It was pretty reminiscent of Game 1 where Indiana was sloppy with the ball, not really playing super well offensively, but they somehow were still managing to at least somewhat hang around. And then in the third quarter, the Pacers came out and they finally started getting some stops. They started chipping away at that lead. Haliburton was still basically non-existent, but then the TJ McConnell takeover began. He was carving up Oklahoma City's defense. He's been probably the best player on Indiana at getting into the paint and attacking the basket in this series. They weirdly have not had much of a counter for it in this one. Doing his classic little short mid-range pull-up, and he just single-handedly carried them back into this game offensively. It was truly a ridiculous run by him. He checked in at the 6:40 mark of the third quarter, and a little over a minute later, he hit his first shot, a little 7-foot jumper, and the score before that was 75-62. At around the 5-minute mark, they were down 13. The next 10 Pacers possessions, TJ McConnell scored on 6 of them and also had an assist on a 7th one. So in that span, he had 13 points on 6 of 7 shooting over just those 10 possessions. The score was cut as low as 5 points. But towards the end of the quarter, they are down 6, and TJ McConnell misses a 3 off a steal on an inbound from Obi Toppin that could have cut it to 3 points going into the fourth quarter. Instead, he misses. They get an offensive rebound, but turn it over once again. Jalen Williams then scores on the other end on a crazy difficult shot with 3 seconds to go, who, by the way, had basically been carrying them through the whole third quarter when the rest of OKC really struggled. He had 13 points on 4 of 5 shooting. The rest of the Thunder in the third had only 15 points on 5 of 17 shooting. But that shot was huge. That was a really big turnaround because the Pacers had a shot to cut it to 3. And then suddenly, with them missing, OKC scoring, it was back up to 8 going into the fourth quarter at 87-79. And so it just felt like they had used so much energy to only have chopped 6 points off the halftime lead, despite the big momentum they had. And then going into the fourth, after Indiana got a bucket to start the quarter, OKC goes on a little mini 5-0 run to push the lead back up to 10 at 92-82. Rick Carlisle immediately calls a timeout only a minute and 10 seconds into the fourth quarter. It's not the first time he's done that, to start a quarter with a quick timeout there. But after the timeout, the Pacers made a huge push, led primarily by Pascal Siakam, who stepped up big on both ends of the court. He was flying around defensively at a couple big blocks in this stretch, got a steal for a run out off of an inbound pass on the baseline after an unsuccessful challenge that he scored in the fast break, got some big rebounds for this team as well. And the Pacers go on an 11-3 run, including 9 of those 11 points by Pascal Siakam. So he was really doing it all on both ends. And they cut the lead down to 2 points. It was 95-93 at around the 8-minute mark of this game. And it looked like we had a game. It looked like the Pacers might really do it again. I mean, this comeback obviously happened a bit earlier than some of the other ones. But regardless, I mean, they did what they do, which is come back from big deficits. And they were fully in this game midway through this fourth quarter. But unfortunately for them, Oklahoma City punched back in a big, big way, which is what they've been doing over the last couple games. Their defense just clamped down like crazy on Indiana. I mean, it was the knockout punch. In just the next 3 minutes from once it was a 2-point game, the Pacers looked absolutely just a mess offensively. Haliburton could barely move. The turnover bug was back in a bad way. A few really bad ones, specifically by Nembhard and Haliburton. And they ended up with 8 total as a team in the fourth quarter. And then Jalen Williams and SGA looked like absolute superstars as an offensive pairing down the stretch of this one. They go on an 18-4 run to push the lead back up to 16 points at 113-97. To which Rick Carlisle shortly after waves the white flag. And OKC goes on to win this one 120-109. So just starting off, this was the Jalen Williams game if there has ever been. This was an absolute masterclass performance by him. I mean, arguably the game of his life, especially when you account for just the context of this being the NBA Finals. But 40 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists on 14 of 25 shooting, only 1 turnover as well. He was scoring from everywhere on the court in all types of ways. He was getting out in transition a ton, especially early. He was scoring off cuts. He was attacking the basket through contact, had a couple different and ones. He hit 3 threes, but he also had some really high degree of difficulty shots. He had a mid-range turnaround fadeaway in the fourth quarter to add on to that run. He had some tough fading, like mid-range, almost floater type in between shots. One going left, one going right, one at the end of the third quarter as well to push that lead back up to 8, as I mentioned. And of course, he had his patented one-handed scoop layup off of probably the wrong foot every single time. And on top of that, he just continues to be extremely impactful on the defensive end of the court with Siakam as his main assignment, who, of course, Siakam did carry them for big stretches of this game, but he had 6 turnovers in this game, which was a huge story for why the Pacers couldn't get things going offensively down the stretch. But this was legitimately like a legendary performance by Jalen Williams, like the type of game that the all-time greats have. A 40 bomb with elite defense in a 2-2 series in the NBA Finals. Like that, these are not the kind of performances that just happen. Like he has grown up in these playoffs in a big way, in a legitimate way. Like he now in his last 3 games of the finals is averaging 31 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists on 51% from the field, 40% from 3. For the finals, he's now up to 26, 6, and 4. Like he has legitimately carried them through stretches of this series. When Shea has gone to the bench, he has been the go-to option. They're running the offense through him, and there's even been a lot of instances with Shea on the court where they've run the offense through Jalen Williams, and that's honestly been one of the big adjustments that the Thunder have made, is taking the ball out of SGA's hands. Not that he's never having the ball. Obviously, he's still scoring 30 a night. The point is to take pressure off him offensively because he was running out of gas late in these games. But Jalen Williams, in the increased ball handler role, has just played his best basketball of his career, of the season, whatever you want to say. He's been that good, and this was a spectacular game from him. Like I said, impacted the game in every facet of it. And the narrative and the question and the doubt, or whatever you want to call it, about him and can OKC really win a title with Jalen Williams as a second option? Can he be the second option on a championship level team? I know they're still 1 win away, but that narrative is squashed. It's over. Anyone still doubting this guy just does not watch the games. Like, he is that good. He's susceptible to some off nights and can be a little inconsistent at times. But that's kind of what a number 2 is. Like just last year, we look at the 2 number 2 options for the teams in the NBA Finals, Kyrie Irving and Jaylen Brown. I know Jaylen Brown won MVP in both series, but he was up and down. He really was. I know he played great, but it's not like the dude averaged 27, 28 points a game when he was winning MVP. Like he got outscored by Tatum still. He was the low 20s. And a lot of why he won MVP was for what he did on the defensive end. Like it wasn't like he was night to night, 25 plus every night. And then Kyrie really struggled throughout points of the postseason last year. So number 2 options are just going to be that. And that's why they're number 2 options, because they don't consistently do it every single night. But the point is they can pop off for big performances like Jalen Williams did tonight. And he has proven that he not only can be the number 2 option on a championship level team, but that he's maybe one of the better ones in the league. Like that's how good he's been. He was spectacular against Minnesota in the conference finals as well, especially that swing game 4, when he had 34 points and shot the hell out of the ball in that one too. So this is multiple times he's doing this in really important swing games in these series. And so just want to acknowledge this as the formal Jalen Williams game that we'll look back on and remember. And again, if you are still doubting this guy as an offensive option or as a player in any capacity, I don't know what you're watching, because I think we're watching different things right now. And honestly, this was just an unreal duo performance by SGA and J-Dub in this game, because I mentioned J-Dub had 40 points, obviously, but SGA had 31 and 10 assists. And so that's not even to mention SGA's 4 blocks and 2 steals. So combined, they had 71 points, 14 assists, 8 rebounds, only 4 turnovers between the 2 of them, with those guys being the main ball handlers in this game. And like I mentioned that game 4 against the Wolves, SGA had 40, 10, and 9 in that. J-Dub had 34, 5, and 3. That was probably the only other game I can even think of that was comparable to the combined performance we saw out of these 2 in this one. But the stakes were higher in this one. You know, they lose that game 4 against Minnesota. It's still 2-2, and it's only the conference finals. So to be in a 2-2 series in the NBA Finals like this and to have these two put on this kind of performance, it was Kyrie and LeBron-esque in 2016. These two are just giving Jordan Pippen type vibes. SGA is not Michael Jordan. He is not as good as him. He extremely likely never will be ever. But the point is, they have similar playing styles. He's the assassin. He's the dude that's going to get you 30 every single night. He's still good on defense, and he's running a lot of the offense. J-Dub is just a rock-solid two-way guy, defending one of Indiana's top offensive options in Pascal Siakam, and can pop up for 30 to 40 on any night he needs. Like, it is very reminiscent of that duo in terms of the positions, the two-way play, doing it at the highest level. And so they're just in a really good spot with these two guys on board. But overall for Oklahoma City, outside of just these two guys, the ball movement was way, 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 way better tonight. And the fluidity of the offense than it was in game 4. I know obviously they won game 4, but 11 assists in that game. They had 10 assists in just the first quarter of this game, so they nearly matched that total. 24 assists total for this one. SGA had 10, as I mentioned, after having a goose egg in that department in game 4. And it led to much better shot selection, better shooting across the board. We mentioned they were 3 for 16 from 3. The reason they could only generate 16 threes is because the ball wasn't moving. The reason they only made threes because the shots weren't very solid. A lot of contested stuff on the perimeter. In this game, they shot 44% from deep, 14 of 32. So doubled their volume and tied their highest number of threes made in the series in this one. So that was a big part of why their offense flowed a lot better. I mean, they scored 120 in this one, so it was one of their better offensive performances across the board. And then going back to the two big lineup adjustment, it's funny because I feel like conventional wisdom would say that the two bigs is typically a move that will help you defensively and might have some offensive shortcomings because there might be less spacing, for example, and you've got more rim and paint protection in there when you've got Hartenstein alongside Chet. But it's kind of played out the opposite for them, at least in this series, where when those two guys are in, their offense is kind of at its best, but they've not been nearly as good defensively. So it's kind of reverse of what you would typically think. But I think a lot of that has to do with Hartenstein's screens have been really just impactful. I mean, they have him coming up to set them near midcourt just to be able to get J-Dub and SGA downhill high up with more runway to get to the basket. So the spacing is even better, but he's by far the best screen setter they have on the roster. And when he's out there, they also get offensive boards. Like in this game, they had a 41% offensive rebound rate. They had 19 offensive boards in this game. Those are both really high numbers. And so far in the series, they have 136 offensive rating with the two bigs out there, and then 130 defensive rating. So they have not been very good defensively with those two out there. I've called out that Hartenstein is kind of the weak point for Indiana to attack, if there is one on the offensive end. Not really much of one, as we've seen, but he's the top, most likely, most vulnerable option in that department. And we've seen that a little bit, but conversely, they've been awesome offensively when he's been out there because of some of the stuff I mentioned. And another part of the two bigs and why they've been so good offensively is because it forces Siakam to guard a big, as opposed to he had been guarding Dort to start a lot of these games, but you would see him a little bit on J-Dub at times, and they're just a little bit more switch willing, where Siakam's ending up on some of the perimeter guys, which J-Dub in this series against Siakam has shot only 4 of 12 from the field. So he's actually been probably the best option guarding him overall. Meanwhile, he's just destroying Nesmith. He is 16 of 28 from the field when Nesmith's been on him. So that's a matchup that you're going to get a lot more of when Hartenstein's in the game, just because they're not going to switch as much with the two bigs. And so Nesmith's going to try to stay glued to J-Dub. And that's just been a matchup that has not been favorable for him. And it is just funny sometimes. I mean, I talked about this back in the Knicks-Pacers series, where as good as Nembhard is as a defender, he kind of got beat up bad by Brunson last year, just couldn't make him uncomfortable. But when they switched Nesmith onto him, that's when they were able to get some stops. So Nesmith, great job on Brunson. Nembhard, not as much, just like in this matchup for whatever reason. Neesmith just can't handle J-Dub in the same way that he's been able to handle other guys. And then, they got big performances from Aaron Wiggins, who had 14 points, 4 of 7 from 3. Cason Wallace, 11 points on 3 of 4 from 3. Caruso was only 1 of 8 from the field, but he had 4 steals, 1 block, and was somehow a +8. So we know he's not out there to necessarily score anyway. And so he still felt like he had a big impact on this one. And really, it kind of feels like Oklahoma City has figured this team out a little bit. They've made them uncomfortable in the most important moments in back-to-back games, kind of on both ends, getting whatever they want down the stretch offensively, absolutely smothering Indiana on the defensive end of the court. And it just, I don't know. I'm starting to run out of reasons why Oklahoma City would even lose another game in this series. The only negative thing I will point out for them is that Chet has been really rough offensively. I kind of talked about this in one of my previous podcasts, saying that he's leaving a little bit to be desired out there on the offensive end, and that he still has a lot of development to do, and he continues to struggle. I mean, 9 points on 4 of 15 in this game. He's now averaging only 13 points on 37% from the field, 14% from 3. He just has development to do on the offensive end. He's a super impactful, great defensive player, and he has still shown that in this series with his rim protection and his switchability, especially late in some of these games. But offensively, again, I'm not sure what his niche is. He's not the consistent knockdown outside shooter that you are terrified when he shoots out there. He's not a back to the basket scorer. Like, he doesn't operate in the mid-range a lot. Like, I don't know what his calling is on the offensive end. The talent's there, obviously. He's got good touch, some ball skills, and he's an athletic freak. But again, it's been a rough series for him. But it has not mattered, because the thing with Chet is, like, there has been discussion legitimately about, like, who's the number 2 option, who's the second best player on this team, J-Dub or Chet. But J-Dub has stepped up in such a big way to just make that not even a question, steal the throne as the number 2 guy on this team. The Chet's just been able to get by and be more of a role player in this series. But it does make you wonder, like, if J-Dub was having a C+ series instead of an A series probably that he's having in this one, like, is this a different series? Because we've seen J-Dub have C+ series, and they lost one last year against the Mavs, and they've won other ones. So it really could have gone either way, but this has been one of Chet's worst series in the postseason. And this is kind of a trend now where on the offensive end, he has struggled across his postseason career. And I know it's a lot to ask for a guy at his age, but it's just something to monitor as we think about this team moving forward and his role and the overall outlook. But on the Pacers side of things, we have to talk about Haliburton's injury as the number one thing here. He had 4 points, 6 assists, 0 of 6 from the field. He obviously did not look remotely like himself. He played out there, 30-plus minutes, but didn't look like he had the same burst, didn't have the same confidence to try to get to his spots. He was a little more passive. Only 6 shot attempts. Whether he's 6 for 6 or 0 for 6, that's not enough shots. And he was deferring a little bit as the ball handler as well to let Nembhard try to create a little bit, Siakam, get some of these other guys. And since a couple of days have gone by since the game ended, it has been reported that he has a calf strain, which is just really something you don't want to mess with. We've seen dudes push it with injuries like this, and it can lead to more serious stuff. Like, calf injuries are the type of things that, if you push it too much, could lead to an Achilles injury or something like that. Obviously that's a worst case, and I'm not saying that's going to happen, but there's been a history of that sort of thing. Like Kevin Durant, he had a lower leg calf type injury back in the 2019 finals, was rushed back, looked good when he played, and then tore his Achilles within 10 minutes of being in the game. So it's a really tough thing to think about, where obviously you really want Haliburton out there, but you don't want to risk injury. And the other thing is, if he's going to be a significantly compromised version of himself, is that even going to help you win? Like, are you better off not playing him and going just full force with 35 to 40 minutes of Nembhard and then 30 plus minutes of McConnell, and just kind of ride those guys, get Mathurin a little bit more involved offensively, up his minutes. And so that's the question, because if they got the version of Haliburton that they got the last game, then I don't think they have any shot to even win the next game. So if he's only 50 to 60%, I really think they might be better off just not even playing him in the next game. But it's really a bummer for Indiana because they still had a chance to win this game. It was a 2-point game with 8 minutes to go. I know it's not entirely his fault because of the injury, but this was like an F- game from Haliburton. If they get even a C+ game, just an average Haliburton game, if he gets 17 points and 8 assists on 45%, roughly what he has averaged through parts of this playoffs. Not even some spectacular performance like we have seen him do in the series. Then they might win this game. They really might have won the game. I know the final score is not going to look super close, and OKC was up big late. But 8 minutes ago, a 2-point game. If you put a regular Haliburton out there, I don't believe that they turned the ball over as much as they did. And those late turnovers are what sparked the OKC big run. If they just take care of the ball in that fourth quarter, then they have a real chance. And the turnovers just absolutely killed them in this one. They had 23 turnovers in this game. They had a 24% turnover rate. So basically 1 out of 4 possessions they were giving away. They had 25 in game 1. So it's still less than that. I know they won that game, but you can't expect to win multiple games when you got 23 plus turnovers. Winning one was a miracle that they were able to do that. And it just took some weird lack of execution from OKC in transition in that one. But they executed super well in transition in this one. They pushed it in transition 16% of their possessions and had a 147 offensive rating in transition. So completely night and day from game 1 when they turned it over a bunch. OKC took full advantage and scored pace almost every time they had the ball out in transition. And in the fourth quarter, like I mentioned, 8 turnovers alone. OKC had 11 more field goal attempts in the fourth quarter. Not to mention they also had 7 offensive rebounds, so that obviously didn't help either. But if that's only 2 to 3 turnovers, then this is a totally different game. Indiana actually shot 67% in the fourth quarter, and OKC only shot 42%. They outshot them by 25% in the fourth quarter, and they still got outscored in the quarter. And 45% from the field, 36% from 3 overall for Indiana. That's not terrible splits, That's good enough to win a game in most situations. But when you shoot that and turn it over 23 times, you're never going to win. For you to be able to make up 23 turnovers, you got to shoot the lights on. You got to be 50 plus percent, 40 plus percent from 3. And that's what they were down the stretch of game 1 and why they were able to win. But some of them were just so unforced. I mentioned, Siakam had 6 turnovers, 3 to 4 live ball ones. Nembhard had 3 in the fourth quarter alone. All of them just awful, unforced, just lazy passes, and passing towards OKC's basket where it's just the easiest run out ever. And obviously a lot of this is they just missed Haliburton. If he is strong as a playmaker and ball handler down the stretch of this game, maybe all these turnovers don't happen. We know he's one of the best higher volume guys in the league in terms of not turning the ball over. But you're not going to win when the other team's winning going into the fourth quarter and then they get 11 more shots than you in the quarter. It's not going to happen. And so this was one of the keys to the series. And so far, they just have not really been able to win this battle. The Oklahoma City defense has overwhelmed them to the point where they're winning out in terms of their strengths in turning teams over. But it's not just the turnovers, because I thought Indiana's defense in this one was some of the worst it's looked in this series. I think for parts of this series, their defense has been awesome. I thought down the stretch, that fourth quarter of game 3, they were just spectacular. The best I've seen this team play defense. And it was just really inspiring from a group that's not really known for their defensive efforts. But I thought for large portions of game 4, they did a great job too. I think the reason they lost game 4 was more so because of the offensive end. But I thought they did enough defensively to be able to win that game. But this game was bad. They looked more like the last year's version team that was towards the bottom half of the league defensively in this one. OKC had 121.4 offensive rating, which game 2 is the only one that they've had higher in the series. That one was a bit of a blowout as well down the stretch. But the big thing is they just got to the basket whenever they wanted. whenever they wanted. Jalen Williams alone made 8 shots in the restricted area, not just the paint, the restricted area. So right at the basket. To have a guy who wants to get downhill like him basically get there whenever he wanted, like it's not great. And then you compound that with the fact that OKC shot 45% from 3 in this one. So like they weren't guarding the line, they weren't stopping them from getting to the basket. Like there was nothing that they were taking away. And when you're not taking anything away, that makes it really hard to win because you can live with pick your poison scenarios, but everything was poison, like it didn't matter. They were getting whatever they wanted, and they didn't have nearly the same type of resistance on SGA and J-Dub that they had in some of these other games. Like Nesmith has just not been as impactful defensively in this series, like I mentioned earlier. OKC is shooting 31 for 65 against Nesmith, which is 48%. Not awful, but that's certainly not like defensive stopper type numbers, which is how it felt he was playing in previous series. And aside from Nesmith, Miles Turner has just been getting killed in the series. He obviously hasn't shot the ball well or played super well offensively, but defensively is where the biggest shortcomings of his have been. The Pacers have a 119.5 defensive rating when he's on the court, which is worst of anybody in the rotation. They're a minus 8.8 net rating in his minutes in this series. And he's just been unable to stick with the ball handlers in the pick and roll in this series. He's just too slow-footed to stay with SGA and Jalen Williams off switches or when he's hedging and trying to recover. And it just felt like how many times you could freeze the TV to see one of the ball handlers going towards the basket and Miles Turner slightly behind them trying to recover. Like it's just, he just has not been able to hold his own. So between Turner just being a huge liability and then them not having much of a counter other than going small, which they've kind of gotten killed on the glass when they've gone small. And then Nesmith not being super impactful. Nesmith also has 22 fouls in 5 games. He's fouled out twice. So they've been more reliant on Mathurin and Shepherd and other guys for some of these key assignments. So things just have not gone well for them defensively for large portions of this series. This game in particular was really not good just from start to finish. I mean, they got off to a hot start. They closed super hot. They had some cold streaks down the middle, OKC did, but for the most part, they were comfortable. They got whatever they want. There was not a lot of force or resistance from Indiana. And if Haliburton's going to take 6 shots and not make a field goal, then they're going to need to play defense because they're not going to win against this offense with the limited firepower they have offensively without Haliburton. And so the question is this series over? And I think sadly, yes. I thought OKC would win in 5 games coming into the series, so I didn't think it would be overly competitive. It's been more competitive than I would have thought, but I just don't see with this Haliburton injury how Indiana wins even a game. Like I talked about his play as a swing factor in this and like about how he needs to be aggressive and assertive as a playmaker and a scorer and just be involved in the offensive flow. And in the games he's not, you're getting maybe a 80 to 85% Haliburton game. And in that, they still can't really win. So if we get a 50 to 60% Haliburton or even less with this injury, then they just do not have a shot. They need close to 100% Haliburton game, an A to A plus Haliburton game if they want to beat this team. And I just don't think that it's physically possible for us to get that at this point, which is why, like I said, I would strongly consider sitting him. Like if he's just out there as a decoy, like this defense is too good. They're going to hound him. Like against a normal defense, I get it, especially if he's more of an off-ball player. You can just have him kind of running off screens and doing his thing. But he's the point guard. He's the number one involved offensive guy. Like he's going to have the ball in his hands if he plays, and they're just going to be vulnerable because he's going to be susceptible to make mistakes because he doesn't have the same offensive burst. And so I would personally rather just throw curveball at him, more McConnell, more Mathurin, more Nembhard as a ball handler, and see what happens and go out swinging that way as opposed to just kind of folding with a super compromised player against one of the best defenses we've ever seen. She's a terrible combination. But regardless of the injury, like I said, I just feel like Oklahoma City has figured this team out since the fourth quarter of game 4. Jalen Williams has been a massive mismatch in the last couple of games. The defense has just been suffocating in back-to-back fourth quarters where Indiana could not get anything going down the stretch. And like I said, Turner has been just kind of unplayable, and they don't really have much of a counter for it. They're deep, but not at the center position. And that's kind of the one Achilles heel for them, because if Turner doesn't have it, they don't really have other options. Whereas Oklahoma City, at every position, they basically have alternatives if they really needed them. And it's not the Pacers' fault, because they've had a ton of injuries at the big man spot and haven't really had a lot of opportunity to address it. But I think that's going to be the number one thing they got to look in the offseason at. One, do we need a Turner upgrade? And two, if we bring him back, we certainly need insurance behind him better than what we've had this year. So I feel like they've kind of figured them out in the last couple of games. And then Oklahoma City also has just been the better team across the board in the series. They've led for 166 minutes in the series compared to only 58 minutes leading for the Pacers. That's 69% of the series that they've been leading. And even in the games the Pacers won, they had to have some pretty big comebacks and were down the majority of the game. They've been playing catch up the entire series, which with a compromised Haliburton and Oklahoma City getting more comfortable on both sides of the ball, it's just not sustainable. It's really not sustainable. And so even in the scenario where Indiana miraculously pulls out Game 6, the Thunder still have Game 7 to fall back on their home court, in which they have a plus 20.7 net rating at home in the postseason thus far. They're 10-2 with their 2 losses being weird blown games with basically buzzer beaters to beat them. And we've already seen them blow a team out at home in a Game 7, a more experienced team, an older team, a team with a core that had won a championship and had probably the best player in the world on it. So I really think OKC is probably going to comfortably win Game 6. I don't think they'll blow them out necessarily. I think Indiana will have some fight at home regardless of the Haliburton situation, but I think their defense is going to be too much. I think Indiana's defense has struggled in the last couple games to stop the OKC top guys. And so as much as I would love to see this go 7, I am not anticipating that it will. I really do think the Thunder are going to win this Game 6 and win the championship. And I just want to go back to something I said last podcast, and I still firmly feel this way. But they lost this series in Game 4. Indiana did. They lost it. They were up 10, shooting free throws to go up 12 with 1:44 left in the third quarter. And they just played awful down the stretch for the rest of the game. But even after their bad fourth quarter, they were up 4 points with 3:20 to go. They had a 3-minute stretch where all they had to do was play the Thunder even, and they would have been up 3-1 in the NBA Finals with three games, a 3-game window to try to win a championship, including a Game 6 guaranteed at home to close it out. That was their opportunity, and they completely blew it. I'm sure players and teams think about this all the time. When was the moment where we lost it, or if this had gone differently, we would have won? That was it. Game 4, that fourth quarter, down the stretch, in clutch time, that was the game they needed to have. I just don't think Indiana's capable of blowing out Oklahoma City because OKC's too good. And so the question was, how many more of these close games are we going to get? And so they need to win the ones that are close. That's their advantage, and they didn't take advantage of that. And so now they've put themselves in a position where the Haliburton injury has essentially just eliminated them because they have no margin for error. They're now down 3-2 instead of being up 3-2, where they could maybe sit Haliburton in Game 6, hope he can come back for Game 7, which would still be a tall task, but at least you'd have that to fall back on. Whereas now it's do or die. You have to win this next game. And then even if you do, you have to win again in Oklahoma City, which almost nobody has been able to do in this postseason. That's going to do it for this episode of the Sean Jones NBA show. We've got Game 6 tomorrow night. So we will see if a champion is crowned. I think it's likely. I do just want to call out that I will be traveling this weekend, so my next podcast likely is not going to be until Monday. So if somehow Indiana wins Game 6, I probably won't have a dedicated pod to that, but would do a podcast after Game 7 to talk about the series at large. But regardless of who wins tomorrow, I will have a podcast up to discuss the series overall and the fallout from whatever the result ends up being. As well, we have the NBA draft next week, so I will have my draft preview podcast out next week as well before the NBA draft. So a lot of exciting stuff. Kevin Durant probably still going to be traded, so that'll probably be touched on one of these as well. But hopefully we can get a Game 7, just because who doesn't love a Game 7 in the NBA Finals? So we will see. With that said, thanks so much for listening, and I'll chat with you soon.